Yeah, so you can probably guess what's the time now for this video. So finally, I got to complete last night Resident Evil 3 Remake. And as you have probably known already, I made a video about how surprised I was of the Resident Evil Resistance multiplayer game. So I've been playing that a lot, and that's the reason why uh, I'm I was able just last night complete the Resident Evil 3. But of course, I'm the kind of player who doesn't. Well, it depends on the game, but I normally doesn't hurry through game, especially first time playing. Um, so I was really playing it with slow pace and just admiring the scenery and just absorbing everything very uh, cautiously and slowly and just enjoying the game. Uh, and it kind of tells you how long it took me first time to play this. Well, I have read many reviews that many have completed this game in 5 to 7 hours first time. Uh, well, it depends on the difficulty. I play it on standard mode, just like I played the Resident Evil 2 remake with the standard mode. Because yeah, I might be a huge Resident Evil fan, but also I'm not very good Resident Evil uh, at Resident Evil games. So yeah, it took me 11 and a half hour and almost took me as long as I played the Resident Evil 2 remake with Leon first time. It took me 13 hours. So this was just 1 hour and a half less uh, long than the Resident Evil 2 playthrough. So yeah, I took my sweet time playing this. Well, you can say uh, almost took me double the time that usually many had completed the game. Now talking about, of course, Resident Evil 3. Um, but yeah, let's just get to the actual review. And first of all, I want to say that there might be some minor spoilers here because uh, it's just so hard to make a review, at least for me, for my kind of reviews, that I will be able to avoid all the details and not spoiling everything. So uh, I'm not definitely not spoiling a big uh, plot scenes or anything about the game, but yeah, just want you to know that there might will be, I would say there will be a minor spoilers here. So let's get to the review. I think overall, I know this game didn't receive as good uh, reviews as Resident Evil 2, but that just makes sense because uh, this is pretty much the core game is still very much the same, using the same game mechanics. Of course, there are differences between these two games, but um, yeah, the game is more or less the core mechanics are the same. So, of course, Resident Evil 2 Remake was a bigger deal because it was the first one using the Resident Evil uh, engine from the third person view. And yeah, so of course, the hype was, I would say, much higher with the Resident Evil 2 remake. Of course, 3 also got very hyped. And yeah, but in the end, I would probably say that I actually enjoyed Resident Evil 3 slightly, just slightly more than Resident Evil 2 remake. And I'm going to explain why. So of course, Resident Evil 2 was much more about slow pace and just RBD being the main location and main focus on the game, the big RBD. But it was much more exploration and much more backtracking on Resident Evil 2 and much more puzzles. Of course, I love puzzles, yes. But I think the biggest difference between the Resident Evil 2 and 3 was, and why I enjoyed Resident Evil 3 more, is the locations. Well, Resident Evil 2 was pretty much about tight corridors inside the buildings. Uh, of course, uh, pretty much the RPD and other, but there wasn't many outside locations. And the biggest difference, of course, as you can expect, Resident Evil 3 has much more outside areas. Well, at least in the first half of the game, I would say, and there are much more room to maneuver and avoid zombies. And here I will come to the next big difference is, of course, the dodge move of chill. Resident Evil 2 didn't have a dodge move at all, so that made a big difference. I already knew that, of course, that just like the original Resident Evil 3 had dodge move, but it worked quite differently, of course, uh, in that game. But yeah, it makes so big difference in overall gameplay, the dodge move, especially on boss battles, I would say. But yeah, pretty much in any situation where there are enemies, the dodge move is just so important. Uh, and it just makes you wonder why that wasn't included in Resident Evil 2. And now, going back to, I think I will soon go back to Resident Evil 2 remake, because I still have second runs left on Leon and Claire. I have just played the first runs of both characters, so I'm quite sure I will be missing the dodge move when I get back to Resident Evil 2. I'm sure of it. Um, yeah, so dodge move really makes a big difference, and the second thing is ammo crafting. And right now, I don't remember, was there ammo crafting in Resident Evil 2 Remake? I have completely forgot that. So, yeah, I have to play to see if there was the ammo crafting. I honestly can't remember if there was. Uh, if there was, then it's really good because uh, the ammo crafting really, really important, and where you can choose what ammo to make, and of course make more ammo to weapons that you love, and what are your favorite weapons. Yeah, the ammo crafting was really good, but like I said, there might have been ammo crafting in Resident Evil 2 Remake, because now I just can't remember that anymore, weirdly enough. Uh, yeah, other things, talking about enemies, of course I already knew that there will be some enemies coming back in Resident Evil 3 that were not in Resident Evil 2. Uh, I'm not going to spoil them, but I think you already know what kind of enemies I'm talking about if you have even a little bit read and saw from the trailers of Resident Evil 3. But yeah, uh, so the enemies were pretty much that what you expected from the remake. Uh, and then, of course, the biggest biggest thing about Resident Evil is the nemesis. And well, the biggest shock for me was, and this is probably the biggest minus in this game, is unlike, this is going to be a little spoiler, but I just have to explain this, otherwise I can't really say it without spoiling something about Nemesis and his actions. Um, so, unlike Tyrant or Mr. X in Resident Evil 2 Remake, he just roamed the, especially RPD, like randomly, and you just uh, uh, stumbled right in front of him, and that scared you. So it was a constant, you know, it kind of gave you a constant fear of just running towards him suddenly. And I expected the same from the Nemesis, but it was much more like with Nemesis, mm, like just some special uh, cutscenes, and of course there was couple of random encounters with Nemesis, but pretty much they were just, you know, like cutscenes, and uh, many times it was just time for a boss fight if you encountered Nemesis. So that was the biggest disappointment for me of Nemesis. I would have liked it to be acted much more like Mr. X was in Resident Evil 2. Uh, but of course, every encounter with a Nemesis was really intense, and I really enjoyed them. But Capcom could have used it much more with Nemesis, and just they didn't use the full potential of scaring the hell out of player with Nemesis. Let's just say that. Uh, so that was a disappointment for sure. Is there something more about to say about Nemesis? Not very much. No. Um, well, speaking a little bit about graphics, of course they were pretty much the same quality like in Resident Evil 2 Remake, but I would say slightly better, just because the Raccoon City itself just looks phenomenal. The later parts of the game didn't look as good, but yeah, the Raccoon City is just fucking gorgeous. Area to explore, and uh, also a slight minor disappointment was that I was expecting the Raccoon City area, city streets, and the whole Raccoon City area to be bigger, but it was kinda small. I didn't expect it to be as small as it was, but of course the locations were awesome. Everything in Raccoon City. If I would like it to be a bigger, the areas were really interesting, and you get to visit some shops, and yeah, the Raccoon City area was really good, and of course, as you expect, there was like in the original, the RB, you revisited the RBD, but only a small portion of it, of course, because it would have been just too just too big. Of course, like in the original, you just explore the small portion of it. And there was, of course, the hospital, and I really liked the hospital area much more than in the original. And the original hospital was much smaller and just not very special, but I really like this. I really like the hospital area of the remake, and uh, and there was some. I think most of you already know there are missing some very important locations that were in the original 3. Is Clock Tower, my favorite place in the original game. Yeah, it was at first it was a big shock for me that they cut off the clock tower from the game. Well, not entirely, but you can't go inside the clock tower. But in the game there is still clock tower to be seen. and the raccoon park that I really liked. Of course, it was really small area in the original, but I would have really loved to see how the raccoon park would look like in the remake. I think it would have looked absolutely stunning with the RE engine, but yeah, they also got that off. But yeah, going back to clock tower thing. So the clock tower is in the game, but you just see the clock tower in the background, uh, and the good thing is the Raccoon City outskirts area that is surrounding the clock tower is, I would say, my absolutely favorite scene of the game. It just looks absolutely fucking beautiful. It's my favorite scenery in the game. The surrounding area of clock tower, the outskirts of the city. It looks phenomenal, and I'm not going to spoil what happens, but you get to go to the surrounding areas of the clock tower. You can see the clock tower the whole time, and that place is just awesome. So at least they did have, in a sense, clock tower in because completely because it would have been really stupid to completely wiped off the clock tower from the game. So yeah, at least the scenery about surrounding the clock tower is fucking phenomenal. Yeah, let's just say that. And the last area was, of course, like in any fucking Resident Evil, you can pretty much already know that the last area will be some kind of laboratory, of course. So, of course, I expected it to be laboratory. Oh, big surprise. So, of course, it was lab in this game too, but in the original, it was more like a factory. So uh, you can you can say that they cut off the factory, but they replaced it with the laboratory. And the last area of the game is pretty good. I'm not a big fan of laboratory areas in pretty much any Resident Evil. The Resident Evil 2 originals and also the remakes laboratory area is not so good in my opinion. It's a little bit boring in both original 2 and remake. So I'm not a big fan of laboratory areas. Uh, oh, I forgot to mention there also was in this Resident Evil 3 remake, one area was it's the area you can also expect from pretty much any Resident Evil are the sewers. And yes, this game also had the sewers area, and I'm a big fan of sewers. I have always loved sewers from Resident Evil 2 and especially the sewers in Resident Evil 2 Remake. Um, so the sewers in this game was a pretty nice area, like that very much. So yeah, there were many more locations. well, not many more, but there were more and different locations in the 3 remake than 2 remake. 2 remake pretty much just had RPD, sewers, uh, that factory area, I think. I can't really remember. Was there a kind of factory area? And of course, the last thing was the lab. So there wasn't so many different locations, but this has slightly more locations, despite cutting off the clock tower inside the clock tower uh, area. So yeah, what else to say? Talking a little bit about sound and the sound effects and music. Of course, the sound effects were, it was pretty much the same as in Resident Evil 2 remake, so just really good, nothing to complain about. Uh, really good sound effects. And talking about music, um, I would say in the music, uh, Resident Evil 3 remake was better, I think, in a music wise than 2 remake. Because 2 remake, it was really disappointing because the original had so classic soundtrack and it was just so minimalistic in the remake. Uh, there was just a couple of classic tunes soundtracks from the original, but they were much more minimalistic than in the original. And also, the 3 remake didn't have as rich soundtrack as the original 3 had. This also had a kind of minimalistic, uh, and there were areas that there were no music at all. But the music that were in the remake was of course the safe room theme, which I love. It's my favorite safe room theme from the whole Resident Evil series. Uh, that was there, and also one of my favorite Raccoon City soundtracks from the original 3 was also included in this. I really loved that. Uh, can't really uh, can't really say what that music was, but it was the music that I think was the main Raccoon City Streets theme in the original, and that was fortunately included in this remake also. Love that soundtrack, fucking great. And I would say it even sounded better in this remake. They have remixed it a little bit. It sounded more eerie. Uh, yeah, really, really good stuff. Fucking awesome soundtrack. So yeah, I have a feeling that there's some things that I'm forgetting to talk about. No, I can't think of anything else really. Uh, it's it's every time really hard to just remember because uh, this is the truth. I never really plan my reviews ahead, and That's my point of these reviews. It's my style of reviews. I just say what comes to my mind. Uh, it's like talking to, just friend or the. In, it, I plan to keep these as real as possible, and I do not edit my videos in every way, in any way. Um, so it's sometimes hard that I got this feeling that I'm forgetting something, but I think these were great. Oh, yes, yes, a very important thing to say. Once you complete the game, uh, of course, uh, this game doesn't have as much replayability as the Resident Evil 2 remake because it has four different scenarios pretty much, and they differ more or less from each other. Uh, this is pretty much the same experience every time, but fortunately, you got to unlock a shop after completing the game,